Science. Technology. Medicine. Health. These four things make the world go round. Without them, we couldn't exist. This is the Monday Science Podcast, a weekly show bringing you the latest research and news in science, technology, medicine, and health, answering your questions or finding experts in the field to answer them. Your host is a pharmacist, an award-winning scientist. She leads her own research group and is the founder of King's College London Fight the Fakes. A tad bit on the qualified side. Welcome to Monday Science. Here's your host, Dr. Bahija Raimi Abraham.
Hello, welcome back to Monday Science. Hope you're having a great start to the day. As always, thank you for listening. Thank you to everyone who sent me DMs to let me know that it was the Euro Cup, not the World Cup. The Monday Science Person of the Week goes to Stephen Latmire. Stephen Latmire is 17 years old and he is very interested in cystic fibrosis. Stephen spent hundreds of hours researching cystic fibrosis and wrote an in-depth report on treatment and medicine options for cystic fibrosis, and also examined the possible correlation between cystic fibrosis mortality rate and geographical area. He completed his work under the mentorship of Randall Smith, who's a senior scientist at Illumina. Stephen received the Dr. Albert Einstein Supernova Award from the National Scouts BSA. Randall Smith, the senior staff scientist who mentored Stephen, said that Stephen is a highly motivated young man who has an unquenchable curiosity about the world around him. From his volunteer work with disabled athletes to his efforts in science and engineering, and through his interest and empathy for the patients with cystic fibrosis. Congratulations, Stephen. I'm in awe of young people who are achieving such great things, especially in STEM at an early age. Now onto the STEM news. Well, the biggest news is Elon Musk has created a robot. At the Tesla's AI Day, Musk revealed that the company is building a humanoid robot and will probably have a prototype next year. He said it's basically going to start dealing with work that is boring, repetitive, and dangerous. He's predicting that the robot would have a profound impact on the economy. And he said that physical work would be a choice in the future. It's very interesting with AI, artificial intelligence, that's helped to improve, the potential to improve robots and their functionality. But it could still be restricted. If you follow me on Instagram, which is at Dr. Bahija Raimi A, I am not a regular poster and it's bad. I am trying. I am trying to improve. But when I do post, it is quite interesting. But anyway, last week I had actually posted a video. It was a repost of a video from a company called Boston Dynamics, and it's a 1-minute clip of 2 Atlas robots completing an obstacle course. The robots learned in simulations how to use a small number of provided template behaviors to get around the course. People have mixed views about Elon Musk and what he's been able to achieve. There was one article, it's on theverge.com. I'm going to put a link in the episode description. The title says, "Don't overthink it. Elon Musk's Tesla bot is a joke." Then the subtitle is, "A distraction and an empty promise." You can have a read. It's quite interesting in the article. He's saying that, well, it's all well and good coming out with this robot, but it could really be false hope and false promises, because Tesla, the cars, haven't reached their full potential. On to today's episode 85. Can't believe we're already at 85. Countdown to episode 100, which will be in December. I wanted to have an opportunity to talk about the last 18 months, how it's affected me in academia, and some of the things that I had learned, because I feel that others have experienced the same, regardless of which field or sector they're in. For those who don't know, and welcome to any of our new listeners, I work in academia, and it's been quite challenging because there have been lots of changes. I'd like to talk about has been how it's been for me being a leader. I run a research group, the Rami Abraham Group. You can check us out at www.theramiabrahamgroup.com. I've probably had a bit of a delayed reaction because it's been go, go, go. And I feel like I'm only now understanding the things that have happened and the changes that one had to make in my respective role. And I just felt it'd be a good opportunity to share and discuss that a bit further in the hope that it could help somebody. For some reason, it's felt like this is really difficult for me to talk about. And I don't know why. If I'll be honest with you, I've actually recorded this episode about 3 times and deleted every version. And I've decided I'm not going to delete this version mainly because I don't have time. So it is what it is. I think the reason why it's difficult to talk about these things, to talk about the impact that the pandemic has had on our respective careers, on the way we've had to work, on the way we've had to engage with people. It's just because we're still going through it. And I feel that that has contributed to me silencing myself. Interestingly, I found out that the phrase self silencing relates to an act that women, this is some research I found that said women self silence or silencing of self in relationships is quite interesting. I'm not going to go into that in detail because it was a branch of psychology I was trying to understand. Probably need to get someone to come in and talk about that. Yeah, it's not meant to be fully about me because I'm hoping that this episode can help people and also people can relate to the various different things that I'll talk about. Let's start off with academia in general. For those who don't know, being an academic, it does depend on the university, the different percentages of the work you do. But generally speaking, you would have teaching elements, research elements, administrative elements. And so for me, I'm a lecturer, and my job consists of me having a research group. And then also there's the teaching element. So I lecture undergraduate and master students as well. Then within the research side, and actually maybe I should say perhaps more within the teaching side, with the undergrad and postgrad, and when we say postgrad in this case, I mean master students, then you also have research projects there. And then the admin stuff relates to, being in charge of a module, various different things that you have to do there. So that's the overall role. And with the pandemic, the actions and activities required in those main areas increased, but also required different things. And I've often said outside of the podcast, but to friends and in conversations, that during the pandemic, I felt sorry for people in leadership positions because the whole thing of being a leader is that your team look to you with the hope that you have the answers. But I've never been in a pandemic before. Have you? No. And so, trying to have all the answers for the various different roles that you're trying to play has been quite challenging. Um, I'll start off with talking about just the general thing, as I said. So there's been a lot of changes, there's been constant changes. And you might have seen some things, those of you who are in the academic Twitter space. There have been lots of various different conversations about academics being burnt out. And I know the pandemic has had effects on students and so forth, but I'm talking about from my experience as an academic. Everybody's been burnt out. We are tired. And it's been a challenge, and it has been, can I say it's been a thankless task? Yeah, I feel like I can say that. It has been a thankless task and it's been really challenging. And just, a lot of people haven't coped, A lot of people have decided to leave academia as a result of it. It's been an interesting time. I want to talk about some things. So let's talk about being a supervisor during the pandemic. And I'm mindful I'm talking about this in August 2021, but you know, at least I'm talking about it, right? In March last year, when we went into lockdown one, I'm talking about this from a UK perspective, obviously, and that was around March. So it was really challenging because in my group, all my PhDs conduct laboratory research, right? So everybody's in the lab. We've got a lab, we've got our equipment, and that's that. And having that moment where you're saying, yep, nobody can be in the lab anymore because we're not allowed. And we had no concept or thought of what can we do remotely. And of course, with anybody who is so with a PhD, you're working towards something, right? You're working towards your PhD, you're working towards your doctorate, and the feelings of you're doing a lab-based project and now all of a sudden you're not allowed in the lab. And what impact is that going to have on your PhD? It's really challenging. And as a group leader, trying to figure out how to manage your PhD, your team, your PhD researchers' mental health, it was really difficult. And this is actually how I got to find out about Dr. Zoe Ayres' work on academic mental health, because I was just looking for any resource to help not just myself, but to be able to help my team. And Dr. Zoe Ayres has some really great resources on academic mental health and just some tips. And so my immediate thing was to prioritize my PhD researchers' mental health, because as much as, yes, of course, we need to do experiments, but if somebody is not in the right frame of mind to do any level of research, what is the point? There is no point. So with that, I remember our first sort of meeting, I said, well, the first thing everyone needs to figure out is, where are they going to work? Like, the space that you live in, how are you going to, have you set up a little office space somewhere that you can say, okay, this is where I'm going to do work, and it was really, yeah, it was really quite challenging. And as I was giving them advice, it was maybe a week after I had done certain things for myself. So I was like, okay, let me try and test, what is it like, what do I need to prioritize, and then I'll hopefully that will help in a way. So yeah, prioritize student PhD researchers' mental health. Then, once everybody was a bit more settled, the discussion was now, how do we convert lab work to remote work? Some of you might be thinking, oh, you could just do a literature review and that should be fine. Interesting discussion. What do you think? Do you think, to do a literature review, should you be an expert in the field, or can you do a literature review because you're interested in the topic and so you're reviewing the literature to understand where the gap is? Lots of discussions on Twitter. I think I'm going to have to come off Twitter for a bit, but it's very interesting when people comment and say, oh, they reviewed a paper and it was clearly not written by an expert. I had that reviewers comments actually once, for a paper that we're still trying to publish, FYI. It's a literature review actually, and it's on a certain topic. I'm not going to talk about it in case any of the reviewers are listening, but please accept our paper. But we're talking about a certain topic that I would say we're midway experts in, but not, top end experts. And this review was a scoping exercise and we did it in a very structured way. But some of the feedback was, oh, the authors are clearly not experts. It's like, that's a little bit harsh because we are, but maybe not on that professor level. I'll talk a little bit about reviewers' comments another day. But anyway, what was I talking about? So, yes. So, how do you then convert lab work to remote work? And is the lab work going to have the same impact is the remote work, whatever you decide to do, going to have the same impact as the lab work? Now, I am not questioning the impact of non-lab work. I'm just saying, in our field, in our context, right? So, as I mentioned before, yes, could consider doing a literature review, but with the literature review, what are we going to do there? And then there's a question of doing something called a systematic review, which is a little bit more detailed, more structured, but I did not have those expertise and we did not have the expertise within the team. So that was quite interesting. And there are going to be a few papers coming out before the end of the year on our work, and I will have an episode discussing that. But essentially, if we're converting from lab work to remote work, what is that work? And do the PhD researchers as my team, did they have the skill set to be able to do it? Do I even have the skill set to be able to lead? Or do we need to look at some other types of collaborations? So that was a big challenge, which I'm really proud of my PhD researchers, because they all succeeded in converting in that moment aspects of their work and pivoting that to sort of more remote work. Whilst not having access to the lab. Also, it was a good time to pause, reflect on the work, the data so far, and then figure out what we need to do next whenever we would get back into the lab. Then also, so everything's converting, converting in-person supervision to remote supervision. With my supervision style, there's a point where we're having a meeting in particular, where even when if I go into the lab or speak to my PhD researchers, there is a point where I like to draw. Now, I'm not a very good drawer. I can't draw. I'm not great. I used to be a lot better. But sometimes when you're trying to explain something, especially when I've mentioned it before, like, one of the things I really love about science and research is, as you think it, you do. You can think about, I'm trying to see if this, that, and the other would work, and then you could do it. But when I'm trying to explain, sometimes it is a little bit easier for the other person to understand if I draw some form of diagram. This wasn't possible. And also the virtual drawing, I know that all thinking about different apps that could be used, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. So that converting in-person supervision to remote supervision was really tough. And there were various different tools that we tried and tested. And to be honest, I would say that it's taken us, because prior to the pandemic, we were already using Teams, Microsoft Teams. And Teams is okay, but it's a bit clunky, and it's, sorry, Microsoft, but it is a little bit clunky, and it doesn't, at least we found, doesn't allow for a bit more organic conversation and free flowing conversation. If you are interested in me doing a video or a live or something about the tools and the coping mechanisms and the different resources that we used in the group to that I used to manage the team during the pandemic, please do let me know. info@mondaysciencepodcast.com. Be more than happy to share that. But again, I would say really we probably only found our rhythm with the virtual way of working probably around June, July. And that's through different trials and testing when the different stages that my PhD researchers went back into the lab, as well as having master's students as well. So that's that. Then what else? Not having a break from work. So making sure that, as you know, we are working from home, but we're working from home during a pandemic. So that meant that you're not able to have a break, really. You're just either sitting at your desk all day or, sitting at your desk trying to have a walk around, make your lunch, this, that, and the other. But it's a completely different space. And my concern was that because anyone who's done research can be all consuming. You can really just sit in one place and read forever and just, you could make your notes. It can be very all consuming. It can be very hard to come out of it. And so I found I had to change completely my way of working. And I started using this technique called the Pomodoro Technique. I think Pomodoro is tomato in Italian. Somebody please tell me. I hope this is not the second week of me getting something wrong. Pomodoro is, I think it does mean tomato. At least the logo is a tomato. Anyway, but with the Pomodoro Technique, what you do, which is why I strongly recommend it. So you first identify your task for the day. So it makes you more task focused as opposed to, I sat down for 2 hours and I did X, Y, and Z. No, you think about the tasks that you want to do. So you write them down and then you set a timer for 25 minutes. You work the duration of the time and then you take a 5-minute break. And then every fourth cycle of this, you have a longer break for 15 to 30 minutes. I started doing this during the pandemic, and I then discovered a online platform. There was an app I was using, but I didn't really like it. I started using this platform. Nobody's paying for this episode. It's not endorsed. It's just me giving tips. Pomofocus.io was a really good online platform. And why I liked this platform in particular is that I would write down my tasks. So you write it in blocks of 25 minutes, sorry. And I'll write down my task. And I'm like, yeah, I'm writing my task. And when I'll look, it would then say, okay, finish at 9 p.m., finish at 10 p.m. I was like, no, I don't want to finish at that time. And that's because with the one thing when you have this that's using the Pomodoro technique, in particular, when you're using a platform that lets you know the time that you're going to finish, you then realize how many things you try and cram in the day. And so instead of going for duration, it's actually looking at the task and trying to be more efficient with the work that you're doing. And so I found that was really helpful. And those are sort of the key things that really, those were sort of the key challenges, on top of also feeling like you should be more productive. Again, from an academic perspective, you've seen all these things in various social media platforms. Oh yeah, I've written 3 grants in 2 months. Oh gosh, working from home in the pandemic has just been great for my career. I'm sitting there struggling to get up sometimes and whatever. And that really had an effect. And when I'm talking about my PhD researchers' mental health, what about my own mental health? The things, feeling that one is a failure, feeling that the group isn't being as productive as everybody else's research group is clearly being, because they're all solving the world's problems. And how do I cope with that? So I actually had to pull away from social media a little bit, but also understand that it really is an individual solo journey. So this is even for anybody out there who you're looking and seeing, oh, people have been super successful because of out of the pandemic. It's don't look, I've said this before, and I said this in my TEDx talk, which is you should never be in competition with other people, just be in competition with yourself. And that makes life a lot less stressful, and you can just focus on what you are trying to achieve. But it does have an influence. So with all of that, seeing all the other things people are doing or promoting on social media and the successes of their group and their various publication bonanzas and all this stuff that I was hearing, I was like, we are not there. We're really focusing on just, is everybody okay? How are you getting on? I definitely started to just feel a little bit of an imposter. So, imposter syndrome, very real. We hear it all the time. We hear this term, we hear everyone talking about imposter syndrome. I'll just explain what it is. So, it's loosely defined as doubting your abilities, your skills and abilities, and feeling like a fraud. And I read this very interesting article called "Stop Telling Women They Have Imposter Syndrome." I will put details of this in the episode discovery. And apparently, this is from the article. So apparently, the term or the concept imposter syndrome, originally termed imposter phenomenon, was developed in 1978 by two psychologists, Pauline Rose Clant and Suzanne Ims. Their study was conducted in what they termed high achieving women. I haven't looked to see how they defined that, but they found that this imposter syndrome disproportionately affected high achieving people who found it hard to accept their accomplishments, and many questioned if they were deserving of their accolades. However, one of the things with imposter syndrome is that it excludes the effects of biases such as systemic racism, classism, xenophobia, for example, and it basically took a fairly universal feeling. So this term imposter syndrome takes a fairly universal feeling of discomfort, second guessing, mild anxiety in the workplace, and they found that women have a particular affinity for this. And I feel that with imposter syndrome, it's something that we hear a lot of in all sectors. Everybody seems to go through it. This article is fantastic, by the way. You should definitely have a read. It's very interesting. And it just feels like, a lot of us have probably doubted ourselves over the last year, and due to the various different things that the pandemic has brought out. I read another interesting article. I will put it in the episode description. But one of the things that's been highlighted has been the effect that the lockdown have had on everybody's mental health in one way or another. And there was some research conducted by Total Jobs, and they found that almost half, and that was about 46% of UK workers had experienced loneliness during the lockdown. The article is called Imposter Phenomenon in the Age of COVID-19, and it discusses different groups of people in the UK that have reported imposter syndrome. So, for example, when they asked how have UK workers' job situations changed since lockdown, they found that 42% had continued to work as usual. Another 42% had a revised work arrangement. So, for example, working from home, working remotely. And then 16% had been furloughed or made redundant. Then, when they asked who's feeling like an imposter in the age of COVID-19, they found that 71% of furloughed or redundant workers felt like an imposter, and then the remaining 33% of UK workers felt like an imposter. One of the things that was interesting is that they looked at the aging effect, or the effect of age on the feeling of imposter syndrome. So they found that younger people felt more of this imposter phenomenon than older generations. Now, they quoted differences between Gen Z. They said I'm going to say the percentage, but there was a conversation about Gen Z, Gen Z, Gen X, and baby boomers. And I got confused because I don't actually know. This is bad. I know people talk about Gen Z, but I don't really know exactly the ages. I believe I'm a millennial, but then anyway, I had a little look. So I'm just going to clarify. This is more for me, maybe, than everybody else. So a millennial or millennials are known as Generation Y or Gen Y. And researchers and popular media say that typically this generation is defined by generation typically being defined as people born from 1981 to 1996. Millennials are the children of baby boomers and early Gen Xers. Okay, so baby boomers, this is the generation generally defined as as people born from 1946 to 1964 during the post-World War baby boom. And apparently, millennials are often the parents of Generation Alpha. And Generation Alpha, named after the first letter in the Greek alphabet, and are the first to be born entirely in the 21st century. Okay, so that clarifies millennials, that clarifies baby boomers, and that clarifies Generation Alpha. So Generation X is who's Generation X? So Generation X are those who have generally born from 1965 to 1980, and Gen Z, also known as Zoomers. Side note, I have started following a new hashtag, Zoomies. Oh, it's fantastic. Please do take a look. It's just a selection of posts of animals just getting really excited and running around. It's usually cats and rabbits and dogs, actually. But anyway, so Generation Z, also known as Zoomers, and their birth date is usually so usually starting mid to late 1990s and early 2010s. Okay, so that's a clarification of that. So this study found that 48% of Gen Z, so if we say Gen Z are those born mid to late 1990s to early 2010s, they felt like imposters. So 48% of Gen Z felt like imposters compared to 33% of Gen X. So Gen X, those being born from 1965 to 1980, and just 21% of baby boomers. And so baby boomers are those that were born 1946 to 1964. They didn't talk about millennials, so it'll be interesting to see what the data says on that. And, a lot of this, and it's very interesting to talk about, furlough, redundancy, and the impact that has had on people's feeling and, the feeling of feeling like an imposter. And, it's important to remember that before that, if I just again talk about sort of from my experience, life before the pandemic, working from home was great. You just have a little break and you're there and you work from home. You'd even be a bit more productive because you're focused. Whereas now we're working from home during a pandemic and probably overdoing it. That's why I talked about using techniques such as the Pomodoro technique and so forth. And, for me, I had to figure out what is my routine? How am I going to create a routine for my day so that I can switch off and also be the best that I can be for my team and for my research group, as well as the various teams for the podcast and SteamEd Collective. So let's be solution focused. So the solutions. I'm going to talk about my top 5 solutions for how my recommendations for coping in the pandemic, if I can give that advice. And I'd also be interested to know if you guys have any solutions and what your solutions have been. Please do write in. You can drop us a DM on via our various social media platforms, but you can also just send us an email on the website www.mondaysciencepodcast.com. So first, I found it's important to have your self-care practices. What is that? So for me, I found having to really think about my morning routine, I started meditating, I started doing yoga. It was great. But essentially, what are your self-care practices? And whatever they are, if you don't have a self-care practice, find one and do it. That is going to help. And that's going to help you be able to either set you up for the day, help you switch off at the end of a working day, or help you switch off in the evening before going to bed. The second tip is ask for help. I just wrote a whole article today. I'm not sure if I'm going to publish it, but I wrote a whole article, a blog post around asking for help. Asking for help is the hardest thing, and especially if you are trying to figure out what help do I need? How am I going to know if I'm going to ask for it? And also worrying that other people may be at their own capacity and not in a position to help. But ask for help in whatever sense. If there's always a help resource or something out there, and it could even be as simple as just speaking to your friend and asking, "Look, I am struggling. What have you been doing to cope?" The other thing I learned, tip number 3, try not to say yes straight away. I found in the last 18 months, everybody wants something, and you're like, and actually, it's so easy to be like, oh yes, of course I could do this, I could do that. But actually, no, try not to say yes straight away, because the worst thing is if you say yes and then a couple of days later, even a few hours later, you realize you can't do it, then it feels so bad to say no afterwards, and therefore you may not end up saying no, you just cling on to it. So try not to say yes straight away. Focus. Tip number 4. This is a controversial one. I suggest focusing on your passions. That's what I did. I started a podcast, and I have to say it has been a great coping mechanism throughout the last 18 months, even though it's only been a year with the podcast. But, it's been a great coping mechanism in the last year and a bit. There's such a big debate around passion. Do you follow your passion, or do you follow your skills? Like, do you focus on what you're passionate about, or do you focus on what you're good at? And in that that sweet spot where you're good at what you're passionate about, then that's a very different thing. But I know that a lot of people this last year, by focusing on their passion, has led them to evaluate what makes them happy in their career or in life. It could be that your passion is gardening. Doesn't matter. Just do it. I'm a firm believer in following your passion. But I think this is a wider conversation needs to happen. Tip number 5, weekly check-in for success. Now, what do I mean by this? When I first started my lectureship, I was a bit overwhelmed, more than a bit. I was very overwhelmed. I felt like there's so much that I'm expected to do and achieve. How am I going to do that? And so what I started doing is I looked at the metrics, whatever the metrics were for my job, and would it started off each week, evaluate what I had done that week to get me one step closer to achieving whatever that goal was, the ultimate goal. And then it went from weekly to I did it monthly. But whichever way, all I kept on doing was checking in. Am I at least completing one task that would lead me to my goal? But then the other thing that I started doing was just giving myself praises for, things like getting out of bed, because some days that can be quite hard. So it was a case of, I'm just going to check in and give myself a pat on the back for turning up to work. That was it. And I as I said, I did that when I first started my lectureship, and I found that was really helpful during the pandemic. So just sometimes check in with yourself, whatever you use as your measure of success, check in and give yourself a pat on the back to say that you did that. And, sometimes it can just be you turned on your laptop and you sat and you completed one task. Great. Or you turned on your laptop, you started trying to do some work, and then you realized today is not the day. You just couldn't do it. So instead of stressing yourself out and sitting there and trying to complete something that you're just not in the headspace for, you switched everything off and went for a walk. That's it. That's fine. So those are my top 5 tips. I hope this episode has been of help. I know it's very different to how things usually are with the episodes, but I just wanted to have this moment to just not silence myself and just say what has been on my mind and how I've been feeling over the last year and a bit. So that's today's episode. There is another episode on Thursday, which will be my review on Suicide Squad. Now, anybody who knows me knows I am Team Marvel. I'm not a Team DC Comics. However, things have, I don't want to say they've changed, but I'm opening my eyes up to DC Comics, and I'll talk a lot more about this in the Thursday specials episode.
You've been listening to the Monday Science Podcast, a weekly show bringing you the latest research and news in science, technology, medicine, and health. We hope you've gotten some useful and thought-provoking info from the show, and we hope you had fun along the way. We know we did. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with us on our website at www.mondaysciencepodcast.com. Shoot us an email at info@mondaysciencepodcast.com. Find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Monday Science, and access episode summaries at mondayscience.medium.com. See you next week on the Monday Science Podcast.